Bonjour à tous, bienvenue dans cette première rencontre du projet de platonisme de l'Antiquité tardive de l'année 2024. Nous sommes très heureux aujourd'hui d'accueillir en premier le professeur Robbert van den Berg de l'Université de Leiden. Le professeur est un très grand connaisseur des différents auteurs néoplatoniciens et il a récemment publié parmi ses nombreuses publications, je vais citer que les dernières, les plus récentes, celle de 2022, un article sur Confusion and Sympathy, the Neoplatonist Proclus on the Aesthetics of Epiphany and Theurgic Union, et plus récemment, en 2024, The Godlike Plotinus and Proclus, Two Neoplatonic Patterns of Perfection. Donc, sans plus tarder, je donne la parole au professeur et je le remercie encore beaucoup d'avoir accepté notre invitation pour venir participer à notre séminaire. Merci beaucoup.
So what I will be talking about this afternoon is the comparison in Plotinus of the Platonic forms to living statues, which I hope to show is a very central image to Plotinus. I take my clue from a well-known passage in the Treatise on Beauty, text 1 on your handout. I hope everyone has the handout. Very famous passage where Plotinus tells us that we have to work on our soul as if it were a statue, an agalma. He says the philosopher has to work on it, text 1. Until he has given the statue a beautiful face. I will be talking about faces a lot in this paper. In the same way, you should remove, Plotinus says, superfluities and straighten things that are crude, work on the things that are dark, making them bright, and not stop working on your statue until divine splendor or virtue shines in you, until you see self-control standing on a holy pedestal. The text, the Plotinian text is, as I guess most of you know, informed by the great myth of the Phaedrus. The great myth of the Phaedrus, the philosophical lover is told to work on the statue of his beloved until he is reminded of the forms, especially that of self-control standing on a holy, and the Greek says, batroi. Now, the important element here is batroids, often translated both in the Phaedrus of Plato and in Plotinus, is often translated as some sort of throne, which suggests that self-control and the other forms are sitting as if they were some deities. They are sitting on a throne. But of course, the word batron in Greek refers to a pedestal, and actually the forms are here represented as statues. The background of this is probably the Eleusinian mysteries, where the Initians were at some stage shown certain statues. So this is a comparison to the impact that the Eleusinian mysteries, the revelation of the Eleusinian mysteries, had on the Initians, which is comparable to the people who contemplate the Platonic forms. In Plato, this is, I think, the only time that the forms are compared to statues. But in Plotinus, and this will be the theme of the talk this afternoon, this is a very recurrent image. By way of introduction, we shall first take a brief look at Plotinus' view on statues in general. And as we will find, Plotinus, when he talks about the statues, the forms as statues, he has in particular agalmata in mind, which are statues of the gods, of the divine, and which Plotinus associates with perfection, contemplation, and divine presence. Next, in the first part of the paper, I will be concerned with the forms as living statues, as living agalmata. The contemplation of the perfect form statues allows us, I hope to show, to experience the presence of the One. The special feature of these form statues is that they are said to be alive and to have faces. Then in the second part of the paper, I will deal with copies of the aforementioned form statues as we find them in the human soul. These are the human logoi. And I will argue that Plotinus here has an image of animation. So these logoi are a lesser type of statues that need to be animated by means of the so-called purificatory virtues, so that in the end the divine presence shines out of these logoi statues. Basically, I think this is what is happening in the passage, text 1 from on beauty. Okay, but that's the entire plan of the talk. First, let us look at how Plotinus perceives of statues. Now, first point of terminology. When Plotinus speaks of statues, he may, among other words, use the term agora and height. The difference in terminology is sometimes lost in translation, when translators render both terms indiscriminately as image. And from a translator's point of view, this is obviously quite understandable. But for our trust workflow, well, that there are actually two types of words we used here. An iPhone refers to an image of any sort of object, including physical particulars. And on the Platonic assumption that particulars are themselves images of intelligible forms, it follows that such an icon is only indirectly hints at the original exemplar. They are, as Socrates puts it in the Republic, thrice removed from the truth. An agoma, by contrast, represents a divine being, and this refers the view to something that transcends the ordinary physical world. We may think here, for example, of the famous Elephantine statue of Zeus by the famous sculptor Phidias that was displayed in the Temple of Olympia. In a well-known passage, Plotinus praises Phidias for the fact that that he modeled his Zeus not on any ordinary mortal man, but that it is some sort of sublimation of perfection of a human being. Very famous text 2. Now, Plotinus not just associates agomata with some sort of perfection or sublimation, but also with the presence of the divine. The agoma is a way to make the divine presence felt to human beings. Once again, a very famous passage, this time from On Problems of the Soul, text 3 on your handout. Plotinus here discusses the way why people made temples and agomata. He says, text 3, it seems to me that the sages of old who wanted to attract to themselves the presence of the gods and build temples and statues, agomata, to that end, looking at the nature of the universe, had in mind that the natural soul is a thing that's generally easy to attract, but the easiest way of all receive it would be if one were crafted to something sympathetic, which was able to receive some share of it. Now, as I said, I think that the important element here is that, two things. First of all, statues are there as objects of contemplation to look at. They are meant for spectators, and it is, as Payota Vasilopoulou has noticed in a paper which I quote on text 3b on your handout, it's about the presence of the divine, of experiencing this, and as she says, this sort of agomata were presumably expected to play a significant role in the lives and experience of the spectators. So that's, you find this underlined on your handout. So then, agoma refers you to the divine. It sort of makes it possible for you to experience the divine, and it has a certain impact on you. That are the sort of things I want you to take with you from this brief survey. Now I come to the first part proper of my paper, that of the forms as statues. Now, if you think about it, Plato's comparison of the forms to statues in the Phaedrus myth serves a certain purpose in the context of the myth. It's about bringing across the overwhelming experience that the vision of the forms may have on the philosopher, just as initiations had a special impact on those who partook in them. but in a way it does not fit very well Plato's metaphysics. Why? Because on the whole we think of images as copies of an original exemplar, whereas of course the forms in Plato are meant to be the original exemplars. So in Plato it doesn't quite work out. I think that's the reason why this comparison does not return elsewhere in Plato. With Plotinus, of course, this is a different matter. The forms, intellect, derives from the one, and one could hold, and this is indeed Plotinus' point, that the forms are, as it were, statues, images of the one. In fact, this idea plays a very important role in Plotinus when he wants to describe the relation between the one and intellect in the early treatises, where he first introduces this notion of the one. When he wants to describe this relation, he reverts to what has been called in the secondary literature Platonic paradeigmatism. Now, the term Platonic paradeigmatism, I borrowed this from John Buchanan, which you will find it also in other in our scholarly literature, refers to the Timaeus, where Plato describes the intelligible world as the model or paradigm after which the demiurge models the sensible cosmos. And for this reason, the sensible cosmos is said to be a icon or a mimema or an eidolon of the intelligible world. Now, all these words carry some sort of connotation of inferiority, right? So especially mimema and eidolon, an imitation, a sort of shadowy-like image of the original. And when Plotinus uses these terms to describe the relation between the one and the forms, it is to stress the secondary position of intellect in relation to the one. It is the intellect, the forms derive their existence from the one. However, it's not, when Plotinus describes this relation between the one and the intelligible in terms of a exemplar and of images, he does not only use those terms of icon, mimema, and eidolon, but also the term paradeigma, agama. And my point is that this carries different associations. I think that once again, Plotinus may here take his inspiration from the Timaeus. In the Timaeus, text 4 on your handout, there is one passage where the physical cosmos is said to be a agama of the living gods, an agama that has been set in motion and made alive by the demiurge. Now, most scholars, when they comment on this particular passage from the Timaeus, find it problematic. They find it problematic because Plato nowhere actually calls the forms gods. So they are at a loss what to do with it. Some scholars have suggested that we should amend the text of the Timaeus. Other scholars try to translate the agama away. So in many translations you won't find the idea that the cosmos is a statue of the living gods. However, some scholars have said, I think with good reason, that actually Plato meant to say what the Greek text says. For example, Andre Nightingale has said, well, listen here, the forms, they are often called divine in Plato, and therefore it's quite imaginable that Plato here refers to the forms as the intelligible gods. There may be a good reason why Plato here uses the term agama, because it's precisely this element that the agama refers you back to a higher reality as a spectator. So, for example, Verity Plat, the text I quote on your handout under text 4, says, rather than simply occupying an inferior position as a representation of a god in an ontological hierarchy based on the concept of mimesis, the agama has a specific function, and I've underlined this on the handout, pointing us towards something separate from itself, but to which it has a certain relation, thereby sharing its sanctity. So, on the basis of these texts, my suggestion is that we should distinguish between two types of paradigmatism in Plotinus. One type of paradigmatism I've called on the handout metaphysical paradigmatism. This is the sort of traditional Platonic paradigmatism of the relation between the original exemplar and the images that derive from it. So it's a top-down relation of causation. But then there is what I've called here spiritual paradigmatism, which is bottom-up. So it is the image that reminds the contemplating philosopher of a higher reality. So just as in the case of Plato, the material cosmos is a beautiful image that points you towards the original, towards the intelligible cosmos. In the same way, the forms point you towards the source of these images, of the form images, towards the one. So it's guiding you towards the original cause. This sort of spiritual paradigmatism, I think you find quite frequently in Plotinus. I have, for example, text 5 on your handout. So text 5 comes from the early treatise 10, and there Plotinus wants to discuss this relation, to explain this relation between the one and nous to his readers. And when he first introduces this, he talks in terms of metaphysical paradigmatism. He says, okay, the one is the archetypos of the intellect, which is an icon. But then later on in the treatise, he shifts to what I've termed spiritual paradigmatism, when he invites the reader to ascend to this first God, to this first principle. We are asked to imagine the intelligible world as some sort of temple precinct. God, the one, resides within the temple, yet he may form an idea of this hidden God on the basis of the statues of the agaumata of God that have been erected outside the temple. And these statues are the forms, text 5. So, since God is by himself, as if inside the temple, remaining tranquil while transcending everything, the contemplator should contemplate the statues which are in a way fixed outside the temple already, or rather the first statue displayed, revealed to sight in the following manner. So the forms are, as it were, statues that allow us to get a first glimpse, a first experience of the one, even though they are not the one itself. Now, Plotinus then continues to explore this role of the forms as statues that guide or direct us towards God himself, when he presents the form statues as some sort of riddles that have to be solved. So the point is, of course, text 6, the statues are not themselves God. They only guide you towards God, but they prepare you to sort of experience God in the right way, to accommodate your way of thinking. And in order to prepare yourself to be able to contemplate the hidden God inside the temple, as I said, you first have to solve those riddles that are posed by the statues, the form statues outside the temple. Text 7. These then, the forms, are images, and yet they provide in a riddling manner a hint to wise interpreters of the way that God is seen. Once a wise priest has understood the riddle, he may, by coming into the intelligible world, make true the vision of the sanctum. Plotinus here alludes to a brief, quite common idea among ancient authors that the works that decorated the temples were in fact riddles that need to be solved by the visitors who sought admission to the deity. And one may think here in particular of the famous tablet of Cabes, which describes in great detail a riddling work of art in an unspecified temple of Kronos. In a similar vein, the Neoplatonists interpreted traditional iconography of the gods and their attributes symbolically. A good illustration in point of such interpretation is, of course, Porphyry's treatise Paradeigmatic, in which Porphyry reads statues as if they were symbolical texts. What then is the riddle to be solved? It has to do, I assume, with the fact that in order to see the one another manner of seeing is required. This is a phrase that was in I think text 6. Another manner of seeing is required. Humans think discursively, it's one thing after another. In this way, however, the human soul may never hope to grasp the absolute unity that is the one. The contemplation of the form statues prepares us for this new way of seeing. For while the form may not be one, the forms may not be one, they all imply each other. For this reason, they cannot be the object of discursive reasoning, but require a different way of cognizing, that of intuitive understanding, which grasps the whole of intelligible reality at once. In an attempt to clarify this to our humans unfamiliar way of thinking, Plotinus resorts to the metaphor of seeing. Intellect sees an object at one glance, rather than first looking at one detail and then at another, as soul would do. Thus, Plotinus does not only compare the forms to statues for ontological reasons, to describe their causal dependence on the first principle, but also for epistemological reasons. We have to accommodate to this new way of knowing things, which is comparable to seeing, to contemplating things. In another passage, this time from the treatise on the intelligible beauty, Plotinus once again returns to the comparison of the forms to statues in order to explain the special nature of intuitive contemplation when he gives an interpretation of the traditional Greek expression that the gods have a life of ease. This is, of course, a very traditional way as referred to the gods ever since Hesiod, that the gods have a life of ease. Text 8 on your handout. He says there, this life is wisdom, the life of the gods of intellect. Wisdom, that is, there seems to be a problem, no sound. Is there a problem with sound? Can you still hear me, or I'm just talking in yeah,
fine. You're fine.
Good. So text 8, the life is wisdom, the life of the gods of intelligible entities is wisdom that is not furnished by means of calculative reasoning, because it was always there, omitting nothing that would require being sought. But it's the first, and it's not derived from another. Its substantiality itself is wisdom. It does not first exist and next become wise. Now we get to the point. Because of this, no wisdom is greater, and scientific understanding itself here is enthroned with intellect, being revealed together with it, as they say that justice is symbolically enthroned besides truth. All such things in the intelligible world are in a way statues, once again, agalmata, that can see themselves so that its sight seen by supremely happy spectators. Now, in the manner of Porphyry's Paradeigmaton on statues, Plotinus here reads a bit of traditional iconography in a symbolical fashion. So, according to traditional iconography, apparently Zeus is portrayed together with justice, and Plotinus here decodes this depiction of Zeus as meaning that in the case of intellect, there is this organic unity of the wisdom of intellect and the intellect itself. the intelligible substance is wisdom. It does not first exist and next become wise. This image once again hints at the fact that the intellection in the intelligible realm is different from our human way of discursive reasoning, in which there is a clear-cut distinction between subject and objects. It's only once the ascending soul has solved this riddle, has overcome the limitations of ordinary human discursive thought, that it may hope to be admitted to the inner sanctum, where the already fluid demarcation between the subject and object of intelligible thought collapses altogether. As it was said in text 6, the one itself is indeed not a vision, but another way of seeing. So, intelligible statues are there as objects of contemplations, as a sort of way to accommodate us to a new way of seeing. But Plotinus gives us more details about those statues. For example, he stresses that they are both alive and that they have beautiful faces. Now, first, the fact that these statues are alive. Even though Plotinus is very positive about such works of art as the Olympian Zeus by Phidias, he elsewhere stresses that even the most beautiful statue or work of art is inferior of a man is inferior to an actual living man because a statue consists of lifeless matter, whereas even the most ugly man is alive. And for this reason, no matter how valuable the materials of those statues are, gold and ivory in the case of this British elephant statue by Phidias, they are inferior to the living person. I think it's for this reason that when, as we have seen in text 4, Plato describes the physical cosmos as a agalma, as a beautiful agalma, he makes sure that it is ensouled and alive. It's set into motion, Plato says, by the demiurge, and it is alive. Now, in the case of the physical cosmos as an agalma, in the case of the Timaeus, life is given to this statue from the outside. It is animated by the demiurge. And in fact, if you read later Neoplatonists commenting on this passage, they compare the fact that the demiurge sets into motion the physical cosmos to the animation of statues as is done by theurgists. Now, the important thing is that in the case of the form statues, the agalmata in the case of Plotinus, these statues do not get their life from the outside. They are not animated, but they are alive themselves. And this has to do with the special material of which these statues have been constructed. These form statues have been constructed not of any odd material that is lifeless, but of intelligible matter. And the thing about intelligible matter is that it is alive. Why is this? Plotinus explains this in text 9 on your handout. The whole thing about the intelligible is that, of course, that is pure activity. Since it is pure activity, he says, text 9, it means that it is not separated from life, nor are life and thinking added to it by something that is other than it, in the way that they might be added to a stone or something inanimate. Then the intelligible is primary substantiality. So here in text 9, he very clearly distinguishes between life being given to some sort of material of which you may make a statue, a stone, or something else inanimate, and the intelligible matter that, because its actuality, is alive by itself. So the statues are alive because of this special material of which they have been constructed. And then there is also another element of those form statues that Plotinus likes to stress. It is their faces. In text in the first text on the handout, we have already seen that he stresses the phase of self-control. If you look at text 10, for example, he once again comes back to the fact that the form statues have phases. Text 10, and justice is not the intellection of justice, but in a way a disposition of intellect, or rather such and such an activity. It is phase, and its phase is truly beautiful, and neither the evening star nor the morning star is so beautiful, nor generally is it anything sensible. It is, in a way, an intellectual statue, an agalmatinoeron, which takes a position of itself in a way and is manifest in itself, or better, or it is in itself. Once again, in text 10, the substance of forms is said to be activity, and this explains why it's alive and beautiful, but also note this point about the prosopon, about the face. Now, if the whole point of statues is that they are objects of contemplation, that they are there to be seen, and if the function of, and if it's true that the forms contemplate each other and contemplate themselves, then of course the prosopon, the face that has the eyes, is the most important part of such a statue. And I will come back to those eyes and so later on again. So much for now about Plotinus's comparison of the forms to statues. As we have seen, they are alive, they are objects of contemplation, but they also, because of their nature, they contemplate themselves as they are, and this is a very remarkable thing about text 10, they are, as it were, situated in themselves, right? It's in itself, and they are especially characterized by their faces. Now we come to the second part of my talk, where I want to talk about the logoi, so the reason principles that are present in the human soul. Now, in keeping with Plotinus's paradigmatic model, just as the one is the paradigm of intellect of nous, in the same way nous is the paradigm of soul, and just as nous consists of form, in the same way soul consists of form-like principle, the logoi. And once again, Plotinus compares these logoi to agalmata, but they are somewhat different from the agalmata that are the divine forms. As can be seen, for example, in the case of text 11. In text 11 on your handout, Plotinus discusses the myth about the birth of Eros from Plato's Symposium. And according to this myth, Poros, plenty, drunk with nectar, retires into, quote, the garden of Zeus to sleep it off. Now, Plato does not describe this garden of Zeus in any detail. Plotinus, though, imagines this garden to be filled with shining statues. Once again, an indication of the central role of this image of the forms and statues in Plotinus' philosophy. Text 11. At every garden, Plotinus writes, is a glorious display and ornamental expression of wealth. But the domains of Zeus are brilliant with reason, and its ornaments are the glories that enter into the soul from intellect itself. What could the garden of Zeus really be except the glorious statues of his person? Once again, agalmata. And what could these glories and ornaments be other than the expressed principles, the logoi which flow from him? The expressed principles, logoi, taken together, are identical with plenty, his abundance and wealth of beautiful things already revealed. So there we have the reasoned principles as some sort of statues. But then there is an important difference. So in this case, these statues flow, as it were, as the text says, out of intellect. So in a way, they derive from intellect. And this is different, of course, with the forms themselves. The inferior nature of these soul statues, of these logos, in comparison to the intellect statues, to the forms, also informs Plotinus' description of the matter of which those soul statues have been constructed. As we have found above, the matter of the soul statue, of the form statues, is this intelligible substance that by its own nature is alive and is perfect activity. Human soul is less perfect because of its association with the body. Plotinus compares it to gold that has been covered with rust and that has to be cleansed in order for it to be able to shine out. But since the soul, so the gold is the soul and the soul is the philosopher, it means that this gold now gets a life of its own. Text 12 on your handout, you get this where Plotinus says of the soul, it is as if gold were to become ensouled, and it starts knocking off the earthly elements that pervade it and cleans it and so forth. So it is, and he once again compares the soul to a statue here. So this statue that starts cleaning itself. Once again, it's on the one hand, it shows you the fact that this is a very special substance, soul substance, but this soul substance is inferior to intellect because it needs to cleanse itself. So this cleansing of the soul that allows us to bring out its inner logoi is in Plotinus associated with the so-called purificatory virtues. So Plotinus distinguishes between two virtues, civic or political virtues that are about moderation. So we have the moderation of the impact of the body, and then he continues to the purificatory virtues, which are about withdrawing entirely from the influences of the body. And it is here, I think, that we this story of illumination, that we have a story of illumination, and in the end, I think, animation of those form statues. If you look at text 13 on your handout, Plotinus there says that in fact soul had things that were not active, but dispersed and eliminated. These are the logos, the reason principles. If they are to be eliminated, and it's to know them as being present, the soul must impel itself towards that which does the eliminating. And it did not have the things themselves, but impressions, tupoi. It must then harmonize the impressions with the true beings of which they are impressions, and perhaps it's in this sense that this nature has them because the intellect is not alien to it, especially not when it looks towards intellect. Plotinus here, borrowing an image from Plato's Theaetetus about the wax tablet, imagines that we have those imprints from the forms. These are the logoi, and they have to, in order to understand those 2 points, we have to connect these to the things that made the impressions to the forms themselves. And quite strikingly, he describes this in terms of elimination. And it is once those tupoi become illuminated, when those logoi become illuminated, that the soul that is by nature is not intellect becomes able, if only for a certain period of time, to contemplate the forms in the way that intellect does. And there is one striking text, which you find, text 14, where actually you see intellect and soul merge, where you see the form statues and the soul statues, as it were, merge. Sorry, text, no. I will come to that text where you find a merge, but text 14 says this. It is about the philosopher who has managed to eliminate its inner typoi, who now enjoys the beautiful statues that are the forms. Text 14, so one should not believe that the intelligible world, that in the intelligible world, the gods or the super blissful beings who are them see actions, but rather each of the things said to be in the intelligible world, which are beautiful statues, Agamata again, such as one might imagine are in the soul of the wise man. Not wrong, but beings. For this reason, the ancients said that the ideas are being, that is, substances. Now, the reference here, of course, is to a famous comparison of Alcibiades in the Symposium, where he compares Socrates to the statue of Silenus, and he says Socrates from the outside is ugly, but once you open it, you will find a golden statue of a god within him. So within Socrates, there are those special statues that you normally associate with the forms. It is something that he also thinks is at play in Egyptian art. Well-known passage, text 15 on your handout. He thinks that the agalmata that you can find in Egyptian temples, that they are the product of Egyptian sages who have understood in this sort of intuitive fashion reality rather than in a discursive manner. I take it this passage is well known, so I only refer to it briefly. And then we have the text I was already referring to, where you can actually see this merger of the form statues and the soul statues, a very old text, text 16 on your handout, where Plotinus first talks about intellect. He says about intellect, for this reason, if someone, text 16, were to liken its intellect to a living, variegated sphere, and either imagine it as a thing that is all face, radiant with living faces, or as pure souls congregated together with without lack, having all that belongs to them, with the whole intellect settled on their tops as so as to illuminate the place with intellectual light. If you imagine it like this, then you would be seeing it from the outside as one looking at another, but one should become that itself and make oneself that vision. So the gramma, the thing that is all face, refers to the forms, and it must be that Plotinus here has some sort of statue in mind, because he calls it a thing and gramma. There's lots of speculation in the secondary literature what sort of statue that is. Some people, like Armstrong, assume that this is a sort of Indian statue of a multi-faced god, but I think that the multi-prosopon refers to the fact that this is consistent with the image we have seen so far, that the forms are statues with faces, and one form in a way contains all the other forms. So this is this conglomerate of faces, and then the soul that is illuminated by intellect becomes that sphere, becomes that thing as well. Now, what I find striking at this is that this term of illumination, the word that's used for tizo in Greek, that it is also used for the animation of statues. So my suggestion is that when Plotinus talks about our logoi being illuminated by intellect, he is talking about it as if intellect is animating our form principles. And one indication for this reading can be found in text 17, a text from Porphyry. Porphyry is the only one, I think, who has a similar interest in this idea of forms as statues. It's text 17 is from Marcella's letter Porphyry's letter to his wife Marcella, and he writes there, among men, the temple has been constructed for the divine. Once again, the temple, discursive thought, or rather the thought of the wise person exclusively. The fitting homage to God is rendered in particular by the person who knows God. It's reasonable to assume that this person can only be the wise person, who should honor the divine by means of his wisdom, and should through his wisdom, and now it comes, prepare a temple in his thought, adorning it with an animated statue. It is his intellect to which God has imparted his form. So an empsygoi agalmati. Now, Porphyry represents the dianoia of the human soul. It is human discursive thought as a temple, which contains an animated statue. That is the news of the philosopher. And this fits very well with Plotinus, who, as we have seen too, compares the soul of the philosopher to a temple where the philosopher goes to worship and interact with the divine. In Plotinus, too, the philosopher thinks discursively until his intellect is illuminated by divine news. It is at this very moment that the philosopher trades the contemplation of its innate logoi for that of the living statues. Now, let me conclude. In this paper, I've analyzed a striking and pervasive image in Plotinus, that of the Platonic forms as living statues. And Plotinus compares the forms to divine statues because they are objects of contemplation that allow the contemplator to gain an impression of what God, it is the one, is like. They are alive since the forms are at the same time both object and subject of contemplation, and they are pure actuality. The human soul who wishes to contemplate the form statues and hence to approach the one has to actualize its potentiality for intuitive contemplation. Plotinus compares this to a process of cultic animation. The human soul consists of logos, its copies of the form statues. The soul has to illuminate these, it is animate them by turning itself away from the body to the intelligible light that it finds within itself, a process associated with so-called purificatory virtues. The result of this animation is that the intellect is present to the soul, which is thus able to transcend the limitations of human discursive thought and contemplate the forms in an intuitive fashion of divine intellect. And now, my problem is this, and I have not a clear answer to it. What I find striking is that Plotinus, and perhaps apart from this one passage of Porphyry I've just noticed, is the only Neoplatonic author, to the best of my knowledge, who compares the forms to statues and talks about this in terms also of animation. I find this remarkable because if you think of the later Neoplatonic tradition, it's all about theurgy and the animation of statues. So you would expect him in a way to have jumped on this image that, as I have hoped to have shown, is so frequent in Plotinus. But as I said, I haven't found anything like this. So this made me wonder, where did Plotinus get his inspiration from? Surely there are some Platonic texts he takes his inspiration from. I've already referred to this text from the Phaedrus myth, where the statues are indeed said to be situated on pedestals, so suggesting that they are statues. There is another text from the Timaeus where indeed there is talk about the soul being some sort of temple. It's a text that inspires the passage from Porphyry, but that's about it. Has it perhaps to do with Plotinus' Egyptian background? As we have seen, he associates this with the agalmata in the Egyptian temples. Also, this talk about animation of statues, you'd find quite some examples in the Hermetic writings in terms of photitza and of illumination. But then again, the whole practice of animation was quite common in the late ancient world. It's not just this particular Egyptian thing to do. As I already mentioned, later Neoplatonists who are into theurgy are very happy to animate statues. So why did he make this comparison? The only suggestion I could offer is that perhaps Plotinus took the whole thing about animation of statues and that sort of thing as a matter of fact. So this one text 3 on your handout actually suggests that this whole talk about sympatheia, bringing divine presence to temples and agalmata, he accepts this, and that he uses this sort of almost regular, normal religious experience in late antiquity as a way to try to illustrate his rather abstract suggestion that the philosopher has to turn inwardly and find God within himself. And this is quite different from the later Neoplatonists, where the animation of statues is not just a comparison, it's something they actually do. And also precisely because they think that God is to be found not within the human being, in the human soul itself, but has to be attracted from the outside. So perhaps the comparison didn't work for the later Neoplatonists precisely because they were very much into this whole business of animated statues. But as I said, I would be very happy if any of you have suggestions how to account for this recurrent image of forms and logoi as agalmata in Plotinus. Thank you for your attention.
First of all, thank you very much for this dossier de text. It's very interesting about agalmata. It's very interesting. I probably Linka maybe will have more ideas than I to answer your question. I don't have an idea which kind of inspiration, but it's what kind of inspiration Plotinus have had for this. I have Wendy who want to ask something.
Yeah, can I make a comment?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
please.
Yeah,
please.
I found your presentation very interesting. I was thinking the very same thing. What's the difference between Plotinus and the later? Because it's always my idea that you don't really have the origin of the theological methods in Plotinus so very clearly, although some people see it in some texts. But I'm wondering if the difference isn't in this. I think it's Porphyry in his life who says that when they tried to get Plotinus to come to the temple, he says, no, the god should come to me. There's this supreme self-confidence, as it were, that Plotinus has, which may be connected also with the fact that the higher part of the soul is always in connection with the higher world, whereas the later Neoplatonists don't take that. Is that the clue here?
Well, I mean, that's the reason why I find this image so remarkable, because as you say, in the life by Porphyry, he says, I don't have to go to the temples, especially not for the new moon festival. The gods have to come to me, and some sort of almost, well, Porphyry is taken aback by the sheer arrogance of it. But then what I in a way find striking is that, given that this being the case, that he goes on about talking about using this sort of imagery to bring across his essential part of his philosophy, and what motivates him to resort to this particular image. So I agree with you. I mean, there is something very special about Plotinus, that God is present, or intellect is present to us, and that we can find it within ourselves. But then what? And that he didn't want to go to the temple, I assume precisely for this reason. But then you get a sort of spiritual visiting your own inner temple or so. So that's what bothers me. I mean, as you see,
Well, I think these passages are beautiful, and I'm very thankful for the way you've put them together, because it brings together things which are very interesting, and I think very typical of Plotinus' way of thinking.
Yeah, so I think my point would be that, in a way, he's a very religious thinker, even though he has little trick with a sort of normal worship. He is sort of worship like thing.
I had a question, but it's just a clarification to understand about the last text about illumination, how it happens, because I thought, as Wendy said, that it was the moment that you connected with the higher intellect, you get illuminated, or you get in contact with these alive forms.
Yeah.
It's this moment that you are talking about, the moment that we go in the higher intellect, that always connected with the higher intellect.
Yes.
Right? So the idea of the animated statue will be the forms that are in the higher intellect, right?
Well, so the idea would be that the forms themselves are statues, but they don't need illumination because they consist of this pure activity.
Yes.
The problem with the soul is that soul is not always
Connected.
active and be activated. And this is done by turning towards, say, the light of intellect, if you like. And if you take, so you have this image that Plotinus has taken from the wax tablet of the Theaetetus, and there you have the tupor, the imprints in the soul, and that you, according to the Theaetetus, you have to connect those imprints with the thing that made the imprint, right? So here, if I understand it correctly, the point is that you have to sort of connect your inner tupoi, your imprint, your logoi, your soul statues to the original thing. So that's how I now understand it.
And this connection, you think that happens when you do the purification?
Yes. And this is, I mean, if you think about this first text on my handout, this is final, the final passage from On Beauty. You have to work until your inner statue, until light shines out. And where does the light come from? Well, I take it that this is the light of it being now so being perfected that it attracts, if you like, the divine illumination from Nous. It would normally happen in a temple where, the special statue is, prepared in such a way that it will attract the divine. This way it attracts the divine Nous, and then it starts shining out just as the form statues do themselves. So it becomes like a form statue in the sense that it shines out light and takes on this life and so forth. That would be the suggestion.
Okay, thank you. I will give the word to Jonathan, who wants to, and also Ilinka after that, I think. Please, Jonathan.
Yeah, hi there. Thank you very much for your talk. Yeah, just really quick. I like at least the quick comment and then maybe just question. That I appreciate the this twofold way of looking at. You described it as metaphysical paradigmatism and spiritual paradigmatism. These two ways you could take the forms and Nous. And I appreciate this. This is going into the theme of my talk and Ilinka's talk. I think later we could talk maybe more about that parallel later. I was wondering also about why there's this curious. It's curious that after Plotinus, there's none of this. There's none of this use of the this metaphor of the statue and the role of the Agalman and the role of forms. I wonder if I don't know. Yeah, maybe you might have some thoughts, but I wonder if there's concern with too much of a close association with the language of Agalma to describe the forms and the view of Plutarch and Atticus of the forms as the lifeless clay models or something like that. I'm just checking the translation from Boystone's. I haven't checked the Greek, but I wonder if maybe the association might be too close because, of course, that's the view that no one wants. But I think Plotinus also doesn't like that idea either, definitely from the the passage you point out.
No. So she's very adamant on about it. So it's not lifeless matter. It's intelligible matter is life. I think that I should look up the. I think you refer to a passage from Atticus. Is that right?
Yeah, and this shows up in a couple Porphyry fragments. This also showed up, I was working on recently in the Syriac translation of his Porphyry text on principles in nature. Yeah, and I was just checking Boystone's Middle Platonist source book.
Well, he may be reacting to this sort of thing. I will be give me the reference here. I sometimes feel that there is this one passage in, I think it's the Sophist, where you have where it's said about Parmenides and his followers, that they make the forms into this sort of venerable yet silent things. And I'm not quite sure, but it sort of suggests to me that this might be that, the problem with the Parmenides is that they turn the souls into well, very impressive, but lifeless, statue-like objects. So perhaps that sort of was inspires also the Atticus passage. It said yes from the sophist. Well, in the sophist he says, well, they are standing there without motionless and whatever. So that's and Plotinus clearly wants none of this. He said, no, they are alive. I mean, that's because of their intelligible matter. That's pure actuality.
Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe I wonder if it's the sort of thing that, once you get to, especially Proclus onward, there's a really more careful use of metaphors. Like, well, maybe this goes with the critique of using intelligible matter the way that Plotinus does, Proclus has. And it doesn't answer the question you posed, but I mean, yeah, I wonder if that could be part of it, perhaps. But yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah, could well be. Clear.
Yeah, I just have a small question before giving the word to Ilinka about intelligible matter, because Plotinus used this terminology in some treatises in the beginning, chronologically speaking, and then he abandoned this utilization of intelligible matter. We have a discussion about that, saying that maybe he wants to be far away from the vocabulary of the Gnostics, but that is all the time using this vocabulary of agalmata and eikon and eidona. So it's interesting to see how Plotinus will choose to use maybe just one vocabulary, that maybe agalmata, that is more precise than eikon or others that use the Gnostics. I don't know. It's a very huge dossier about the images on the Gnostic text, and also in the discussion with Plotinus. So I don't know, it's just an idea. Maybe it's connected, the fact that maybe he abandoned to, I don't know. I'm just putting there this information. Maybe Linka want to add something more.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, thank you. That's certainly really thinking about it.
Linka?
Yeah, thank you for a wonderful talk and a wonderful collection of passages. And I was kind of wondering if, as Jonathan said, we'll get to agalmata during the later talks, and we'll have a lot of, let's say, later authors. But looking at Plotinus, I was wondering if he plays with the, let's say, term or with a metaphor of agalma because of its versatility. Because an agalma can either be used as you describe it in this, the distinction between two kinds of paradigms and then paradeigmatism, so to say. Statues can point to somewhere else, can be basically an object of encounter which points beyond itself, or statues can mediate, let's say, divine presence, divine illumination, and there you have the connection to, let's say, the ritual sphere to a certain point. Also, in the case of normal, ordinary statues, this intriguing passage with the, let's say, portion of the world soul snatched into statues and so on, that would be this top-down, let's say, not just mediation, but a phenomenon where the divinity or the soul or whatever becomes present. And I was wondering, wondering about the texts 5 to 8 or whatever. This, of course, very intriguing, very well-known idea of the temple that you dwelled upon, of the statues as the first thing you see. Here the idea would be to get beyond the statues. So the statues, do they mediate? What's the role of the statues? Is it just the first encounter? Is it a preparation? And can these statues that we encounter there be compared to the way in which he talks about, let's say, justice in a later text on your handout as a statue in itself, shining out of itself, and so on and so forth. So do we have different, let's say, different kinds of talking about forms as statues, or about intelligible realities as statues?
Yeah, so one of my suggestions would certainly be that the forms are more than just a sort of mediated experience of the one, but as I said, that there is also something that the contemplation of the forms prepares you for the is sort of necessary exercise in order to get to the one. So if you think about this text 6 there, he says, well, in the end, about one, if someone looks in a different way, then nothing is present to him. So it has to, the soul has to come to look for the one in the right way. And this contemplation of the forms that poses special demands on the soul, a very different way of looking at it as done before, I suggested, is meant as some sort of intermediary stage, as a sort of preparation for the to prepare the soul for, or to prepare the philosopher, but not even the soul, but because it's still soul, but to prepare the philosopher for the right way of looking. So it's also an exercise in getting to look in the right way, if you like. Once again, of course, this is metaphorical for different modes of cognition, but so I think that it's not just you have first the statue and then the one, or then the God, but it's also to prepare yourself in this particular way, if that makes sense. Here.
Ilika, do you want to add something, or can I give the word to Jonathan?
No, thank you.
Okay. And then Wendy, please.
Yeah, sorry, just really quick. I was just looking. I'm searching through Boystone's source book. There was a passage in Seneca that I wonder if maybe there's some background with that Plotinus may be drawing on here. It's from letter 58. I'm just looking at this line that says what. So he uses this image, like the image of the painter thing again. Like in Plotinus, but he says what the artisan extracts. So he said he wants to render Virgil and paints. The painter looks at Virgil. The idea was the outward appearance of Virgil, the paradigm for the future artwork. What the artisan extracts from this and imposes on his work is the eidos. And what's the difference? One is the paradigm, the other the form derived from the paradigm imposed on the work. It says a statue has a certain outward appearance, that is the eidos. Its paradigm has another outward appearance, which the craftsman looks to when he carves the statue, and that is the idea. And if you want another way of making the distinction, the eidos is the artwork, the idea is outside the artwork, and so on. And I wonder if, I don't know if really this maybe is in the background to what Plotinus is using or drawing on. I wonder might this kind of thing be in the background for Plotinus?
Yeah, so I think that if you think about Plotinus' ideas about statues, about arts, about images, of course, there's always this one passage I had on my handout, text 2, that you always find about that Plotinus takes a different view on art that Plato had done, but that's part of a much larger discourse about what art is and so forth. So I could well see that this is indeed a context that's relevant here, because it's one offhand remark in Plotinus, as I said, is part of a much broader discussion. And clearly, he knows this discussion, these ways of thinking about art and its relation to reality. So yes, I could very well imagine that he is very well aware of this much larger discussion, and that's relevant for what he's doing here. as so often with Plotinus, this short remark shows you that he's aware of a broader discussion, which he then doesn't spell out to you, but somehow takes you for granted that either you know it, or if you don't know it, then, well, it doesn't really hinder the point he wants to make. But yes, I agree with you. I sort of assume that there is something like that relevant here.
Yeah, it definitely sounds more developed in Plotinus, but yeah, I was curious. Thank you.
Please, Ms. Wendy.
Yeah, just a comment. I was away for a minute, so I don't know if you developed this, but in connection with text 9 on the statues as being living, I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of these statues, that he says they are alive. And what I read there, and I don't know if that was brought up by you, Alinka, but what I read in 9 is that they have to be alive, because that is Plotinus' understanding of the noetic world. This noetic triad of life and mind and being, ousia, zoe, and noein. So those they're not as as definite in Plotinus as in some other authors, but definitely those three aspects of the main the megistigene of the sophists in the noetic triad in Plotinus. So that's where I see there, and I think that aspect reflects then his use of the noetic triad as well.
Yes, certainly. I think that's very much relevant here. That's precisely that mind has to be, well, being and alive, and that this is very fundamental to Plotinus. Yes. But that's also precisely why, in a way, I find it quite amusing or interesting that he then says it has to be life and pure being, but then he says that they are statues, and in a way you think of statues as being the very opposite of being alive. I mean, the whole thing about statues is that they are lifeless objects, and here he's time and again he comes back to this: the statues are automata and they are alive, as of course as they should be, otherwise it could. But in a way, it's sort of contradictory to say, oh, they are forms. Okay, then you have the connotation of perfection and sublimation, perhaps, and they are alive. And then you think, yeah, well, but this whole point about statues that most of the time they are not. That's right. Indeed, I should say to this is a crucial triad that he wants there to this is what for him the intelligible is. Yeah.
Do you want to add something, Wendy, or can I give the word?
No, go ahead. Fine. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Very. That's. I mean, I think the interesting question is whether these different, let's say, approaches to forms as statues, or to the inner statues in oneself, to the image of the temple and so on, whether they amount to a, let's say, coherent concept of the form as statue, or of the intellect or intelligible, which more or less coincide, as statues, or whether we have, let's say, a very versatile and fecund metaphor to different contexts in order to highlight certain aspects. Let's say, for example, the living aspects, a brilliant aspect, and so on in text 10, also with justice, which of course recalls the Phaedrus very clearly, and the idea of preparation and of an itinerary within a certain sanctuary complex, as in the texts from Ennead 6-9. So is it the same form as statue concept in all of these? Or is it let's say, something like Wittgenstein's Familienähnlichkeiten, family resemblances, sort of overlapping circles of signification? And
yeah, so
intriguing question that the paper has started you with.
Let me also take another. Now, I've been wondering about this. So I think that the sort of suggestion that I give in this paper is that it's sort of rather coherent image. Then you may say that this is over-systematization of this image, or perhaps not. But this is something that is, yeah, well, that also occupies me. So, is there sort of as Plotinus is sort of image that fits different purposes very well and is this sort of coherence, or is it, as you said, this sort of family resemblance, and that he uses one aspect in this context and another in that context? I mean, of course, the paper sort of suggests that Plotinus could have written a treatise Paradeigmata where he would have put this all together, and that I'm not quite sure of. So there might be some sort of over-systematization from my side, but I find it a very intriguing question. I try, yeah. Well, it's especially if you think about the thing that Luciana just brought up, that of course it's intelligible matter, which is relevant in some cases, gets out of the picture in later treatises. Then, so yes, I see your question, but I have no good answer to it. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you for setting us on this path, and it was a really totally open question. So
yes. As I said, I mean, it is also in many ways, it's also many things are open to me, open questions to me as well. I mean, you can see all the passages, and somehow they seem to connect, but then you feel there must be something more to, or at least I feel there's something more to it. And of course, the thing is to get what's behind it all, if there is anything behind it. But yeah, it's so yes. I in a way I'm also full question mark myself.
I have an observation to do it that maybe will put us in the direction of the aporia, but it's maybe to answer the question of Ilinka, that maybe the context can play some irrelevance to understand this question. It's in the chapter 1 or treatise 32.5.5. And he put the question, he's telling us in this chapter all kinds, what the intelligibles are and what they are not. The translation in English from Armstrong is much less negative than that one from Breyer. Breyer is a little bit different, and he asks, whatever sort of shape or imprint will we receive from them, which means which intellect we receive from the intelligibles, unless we assume that they are like images set up, made of gold or some other material by a sculptor or engraver. But he will say no for this possibility. He will say, no, it's not exactly like that. So there is a discussion about this question of concept, let's say, saying that the intelligibles are images of gold. In a way, they are, because you show us so many texts that they are images, they are gaumata. But then in this text, he's saying not exactly, not in this way you're thinking, maybe as something that is not in movement, alive. Probably he don't develop, but I think the idea is also there. But it's interesting to see that's another text to add to your dossier.
Yes, thank you.
I see that time is running and the discussion is really interesting. I'm really sorry to cut, but I don't know if someone has a last question to put it. Otherwise, I will maybe close and then ask to Eric to present the next speaker. I see that I don't have any hands, so maybe it's time to thank you very much again, Professor, and I'm really happy about this presentation that will make us think a lot